We are here. Avis Berry, Leon Anderson, thank you guys for joining us and being here. First of all, just thanks for letting the county take your name. The county was named after you, I'm assuming. That's right. Before I dive into some questions, just tell us a little who you are. Avis, we'll start with you. Tell us about your family, how you got here, et cetera.
Sure. Well, my name is Avis Berry, and I came to Tallahassee to go to school at FSU. And but I come from Clearwater. Clearwater is my hometown, and I grew up in a family with I had several brothers and sisters, and I like to think of it as it relates to race and everything in the church. I grew up with two perspectives of church. I went to a Primitive Baptist church, and I went to a Southern Baptist church. Because I had a hearing impaired brother. And so we ended up going to a predominantly black church, but we also went to a predominantly white church. I think we were one of the first black families to be there. And but it was important for our family because my brother needed the services that church provided, and it gave him a community of hearing impaired believers that he could be a part of. So I liked having that perspective of both worlds, because for me, I grew up in Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, where we were, integrating and loving everybody anyway. So it was good to be a part of both of those worlds. And I felt that in both circles. I felt at home with the Primitive Baptist, but I also felt at home with my Southern Baptist church as well. So I feel like I've always grown up with this worldview that, everybody should love everybody else and we are all going to be integrated together. And then I went through school. All my schools were integrated, so I never felt like I was in an all-black school or an all-white school. I always felt like I had this mixed community as I went through school. And then I auditioned for FSU, and I got into the music program there, and I ended up with a voice performance degree from FSU, along with 2 master's degrees in education and library and information science. So I have now a job where I sing, and I'm a school teacher, a 5th grade teacher at Gilchrist Elementary School. And I work in the College of Music in the music library. So I have fulfilled all of my education goals that way. And I'm doing what I love. I have always found myself to be in lots of different circles. Even growing up or going to FSU and the College of Music, I studied classical music, but I still found ways to delve into different worlds. I will never forget, one of the students there told me, he goes, why do you have to focus on just one thing? He goes, why can't you do everything that you want to do? And I was like, you're right. I shouldn't have to just do classical music, even though that was my basis and my focus, and that's what I studied. But I kept my foot in church. I kept my foot in the live music scene. I kept a foot in jazz. And so I felt like I was still fulfilling all those pieces. And that gives you a great exposure to different people in different arenas as well. So I feel that the music is far-reaching in that regard because it caters to different people and different needs that people have. So I feel blessed and lucky to have been able to be versatile enough to do all that I have been able to do.
So how many brothers and sisters did you say?
Okay, so I have... I have to go through this now.
It's a lot when you
So I
count.
have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And my natural brothers and sisters, I have 1 natural brother and 1 natural sister, but everybody else was a step in some form. And then we adopted a brother. So it's kind of all been in the family, but that's how we were. And we're spread out a bit. So we weren't always together at the same time, but yeah, it was a family of 6. Now, my own children, I just have a daughter and a son, and my husband, of course. And even that's interesting because my husband's from Kenya, so he's bringing in a whole different cultural perspective as well. So that's interesting as well. So, but yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was from Kenya.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yep.
That's good. Well, I'm dead set against large families.
Yeah, right.
Myself too. So our 6
His
children
family
as
was
well.
8. He had 8 brothers and sisters. So,
Wow.
so
That's
there's
great.
a lot of them.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, Leon.
My name is Leon Anderson. I'm originally from Shreveport, Louisiana, by way of New Orleans, I like to say. I'm married, have 4 children, 3 by marriage, my 3 boys, Nigel, Vincent, and Isaiah. And my daughter, Ariel, was with my wife when we married. So she's from Mississippi, and but my hometown is Shreveport, Louisiana. I come from 2 musical parents. Both of my parents were musicians. My father was a high school band director. My mother was a middle school choral teacher. So music has been running in my family as long as I can remember. I have 1 sister. Sadly, she passed away a few years ago. So it's just me and my mother now. My father died when I was 25. So it's just me and mom right now. But I grew up in a very loving situation. We grew up, my parents started off, my father met my mother when she was student teaching. He was already a band director. So he was like the band director. She was the student teacher in the choir department, and they started dating and what have you. And so they married, and I was born a year later. I was born in the late 60s. And so my parents went from a situation where they rented a room in a house of a family member to renting their own first house. I remember our first house was like a 2-bedroom house in a black neighborhood. And when things got a little rough in that neighborhood, my mother and father worked very hard. I was about 7 years old by that time. We moved to a new development in town. Actually, it was a suburban development on another side of town. It was actually, and I know we're going to talk about things like this, but it was actually a development that was designed for a multiracial. They wanted people of all races to move into that development. But what happened is the first family to buy out there was a black family. And so when they tried to sell to whites, they would not purchase land or build in that place. So what happened is it ended up being an all-black suburban neighborhood. This is the mid-1970s. This is, I like to think of my family as we were known as like the black middle class, right? And so I grew up around other people that had 2-parent homes. It was just like a regular neighborhood situation. There weren't any liquor stores or, people standing on corners or any of that kind of activity. It was like 2-car garages, front and backyard, fenced yards, working class folks, school teachers, school principals, school administrators, people who work for GM. I lived around professional people, in a sense. And so I think that's been a part of my upbringing. And then, I went through school and everything. I took up music, like just being around my father.
You had to.
Yeah, I was that little kid that sat under the ladder when my dad was outside in that hot sun with the band doing marching band drills. I was that little kid sitting on the ladder right there, just watching it all the time. And I was always fascinated by the drums. So when I got into middle school, like most kids, I joined band. I played sports too, but I joined band as well and took up the drums and continued on through high school and figured out that I wanted to go into music. But I did not want to be a high school band director. I wanted to be more of a performer. But I took my father's advice, which is I majored in music education just to have a solid background. Although I didn't really want to go into public school teaching, but it's a solid background. Studied percussion, finished from Louisiana Tech University, and then I went on to get a master's degree at Southeastern Louisiana University, which is consequently about 15 minutes outside of New Orleans. So I was beginning to be exposed to like musicians from the city. I would drive into the city, go to a few jam sessions, and then I got hired for a gig. And that's kind of how things start right there. It's like you get hired for a gig, some other people hear you, then your name gets tossed around. And so I was in school balancing a performing career and finishing my master's degree. And finished my master's degree, moved into the city of New Orleans and just worked as a full-time musician for about 4 years. And then I got a call. I was doing some part-time teaching. I did get a call from FSU saying they were seeking a professional drummer who also had degrees in music. And so I came down and did the interview. And about 2 weeks later, I got a job offer to teach at FSU. And I've been here now for 22 years. And so I'm very blessed to be in this situation. And I love what I do. And playing music is what I love to do. And I love to teach. So I think I get that from my parents.
Anything that you remember, though, I mean, the example you gave is great. And by the way, I grew up in Alabama. And so you saying that, the initial house being sold,
Yeah.
and then white's not buying it, I go, yeah, I can understand that would have happened, they're based on where I grew up. But just anything, when you think of the subject of justice, anything that you experienced growing up, you'd say, this was a great experience. Or maybe on the other end of the spectrum, this was not such a great experience. That anything that had to do with your schooling or classmates or anything like that.
I can think of a few things that I was a little kid, but that I think my father went through. My mother kind of told me about it later, and then I actually saw it as I got a little bit older, but by that time he had established himself. My father was the first African-American to get offered a position at pretty much an all-white, like a brand new school that they had just built. This is like right in like about 1971, 70, something like that.
Because you said you were born late 60s?
Late 60s. So I was a little kid when he got that job.
Yeah, I was 1970, so I'm way younger than you. Keep going.
And so some of these stories are told to me by my mother.
Sure.
My dad didn't really talk much about it, but he got hired to teach band in a predominantly white area. So he caught a lot of flack right off the gate. Students were saying, parents were saying that they weren't going to enroll their kids in band, and they didn't want their kids to be a part of like a jive time band or something like that. And the funny thing about it is my father was the complete opposite of that. He believed in kids learning how to play their instruments properly. My father has a military background, so he was into like Sousa marches, Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, and Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Gladys Knight. I mean, he was into everything, but he really had his bands like working on like a strict regiment, kind of thing. He wasn't into like what they call show band kind of stuff, But once people saw that he was serious and that he had a really stringent, really good program, then they began to enroll their kids in band. And actually just, fast forward, his bands would go to contests, win sweepstakes. They were winning like ones at festivals and things like that. And to this very day, I have students that went to school under him that still contact me at FSU saying, man, I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to study under your father when I was in high school or what have you. But it was difficult for him. And the thing about it is he caught flack from not only the white community, he caught flack from the black community too. There were people that weren't really, I guess, into the idea of him, going to teach at an all-white school. Now, part of this was he was drafted by the principal, the guy who was hired who was a white man, got the principalship at that school, and he was the principal at another school that my father was band director at one time. He was the one who requested that my father come over there. And so a lot of people were not pleased in that community at first. But after a while, it took some, he earned his respect, I'll put it to you like that. But over time, you could see there would sometimes be, because my father's bands didn't maybe do a certain type of show or something like that, sometimes that ruffled feathers in the black community. And then again, there was always that stigma of like, you're gonna have your kids go and, go to this school and take band from a black band director. He went through those kinds of things too. I was also a product of integration when there was busing. So, at one particular time I was going to predominantly black schools, then that all changed overnight. And they started busing us to like all these different schools. And so now you're around kids that aren't really happy with you being there. I was that product. I was a product of some of that. I can remember distinctly being sat in the back of the classroom, in some of my classrooms. And one instance that I can think of is that I had this first grade teacher who insisted that are right-handed, but I'm left-handed. So now I know other people. This has probably happened across. This is not necessarily a racial thing, but she tried to force me to write right-handed, and she would not take no for an answer. And I was just naturally, every time I picked up the pencil, it was with my left hand. So she sat me at the back of the classroom and just figured I was going to be one of these just kids that aren't going to learn well or what have you. And by the time I got to the second grade, I started off at like the lower end of the class. By the time we got to the end of the second grade, she said I was like the best student in the class. Yeah. And she figured some things out. Just some people didn't take the time enough to give you an opportunity, in certain places. So those are some things that I can think of in my younger days that I may have experienced that might have been negative, but it's always been in my nature to try to take a negative and turn it into a positive some kind of way. I think I get that from my parents too. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I get a lot of that from my parents as well. My mother was very much, she was a go-getter to begin with, and she was in so many different circles. And so naturally, she encouraged me to be in so many different circles. Right. So I was in a community group that performed all over, and it was integrated. And I was in Girl Scouts, and we had all kinds of kids in that too. So I was never in a circle that was just one thing, except for church, really. Mm-hmm. That was the only time I really recognized that I was like different. Like when I went to the white church, mm-hmm. I was like, I'm the only one here. And, mm-hmm. and even the kids would kind of, I remember them touching the hair and all that stuff too, but they were all so very kind. So I think I kind of grew up a little naive about the racial tensions that were there. But my mom also too, I remember her sitting me down and saying, we're going to watch this movie about Jane Pittman, or, we're going to watch these movies because you need to know that these things happened. And so even though we're in all these spaces, don't forget that there was a process that came to us being here. And so she was a teacher. Both my parents were teachers as well. But they used to teach at Black schools, and then they got integrated as teachers. So she experienced all of that and all the sit-ins. And so she would tell us these stories, and I'm like, really? Like, that's how it was? Like, it was just weird to me, because as a little girl, I think children, period, they have just this innocence about how we kind of ebb and flow through the world. But it's like as you age and you get older and you see like this history that came before you, that's when you're like, wow. And I didn't experience any kind of, I would say, injustice really until I started working and when I became an adult. And then I started to see it in the workplace. And that was kind of a big shock to me, but it was also the greatest God lesson I had too, because it taught me how to surrender and just give it to God. I'd done my part. I'd done what I could do. And then I kind of said, Lord, I'm just going to let you take this. And I said, and either way, I was like, if it goes good or bad, south or whatever, my truth. So I'm prepared to go where you go, but wherever you lead me. And so, but I didn't think that someone would just have it in their heart to try and destroy the livelihood of someone else. And that livelihood would have been mine, and I was like, wow. Like, and I was like, what did I ever do to you for you to try to come and attack me that way? It was so bizarre. Like, I really didn't quite understand it. And I went through a really hard time, even just going like, God, I don't know how to deal with this really, because I didn't do anything wrong, or I'm not doing what they're accusing me of. So that was a moment where I just kind of had to sit back and be like, you see what they're saying about me, you see what they're doing. And I said, I just have to surrender this to you. Yeah. And I did. And just, that helped me a lot in my walk, in my faith walk with Christ. But, it was a big shock to me, because all my life growing up, I had been in these different worlds, and I had never really felt the harsh racism criticism, because I felt that, I was growing up in a time where people were trying to integrate, and, and that's what I saw. I was always around these mixed kind of circles. And so I do think I kind of walked into the big world a little naive, because then I was like, okay, it really is here. And
This
they
is
really,
what I heard about.
This is what I heard about, and even had evidence of the racial slurs and stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really happening. And I didn't think it would. And I was just like, I've always tried to be kind to people, and never, but anyway, it doesn't matter really sometimes. Sometimes people just they don't like maybe your position of power, or they don't like that, I don't know. They just don't like you for some reason. And sometimes it's the color of your skin, as was evidenced by some of the emails that circulated. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. So I surrendered it because it was actually out of my hands at that point. But I'm glad I don't really see that so much anymore. But now it's kind of weird seeing all these protests and things going on, and a lot of stuff on social media, and dealing with my now grown children and how they're interacting with everything that's happening. And then trying to educate them to say, like, you cannot, like, cancel all white people just because
Right.
just because they don't agree with you in this moment, And so it's really been an interesting dialogue to have with my children now, about race and race relations, and still wanting them to keep their passion and advocacy, but also understanding that it is a conversation that has to happen with people. And we do have to try and hear we have to hear their stories, because we need to know where they're coming from. But yeah, that's how I think about justice. It's like it was all naive and beautiful, and then I was like, bam! I was like, okay, that's it.
Growing up the way that both you did, because it sounds like you guys really honestly had a great blessing, growing up. Meaning that it sounds like you could have in some ways fit in any world.
Right. Like, I feel like it was like a normal childhood. Just, and I mean that in a sense, like a broad sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, it's almost like you could have gone to a white school, you could have gone to a brown school, you could have gone to. It sounds like the way that your parents taught you guys to think about life, to approach life, was, hey, let's celebrate color, because I think God does that. I think God delights in it. It sounds like you could have fit anywhere.
I think because of what we do, being musicians, music is for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of that outreach too, is, we're not playing for just Black people. We're not playing just for, whoever. We're playing for everybody. Music is it's a ministry in many ways. I even look at it in some ways like in some secular ways, it's still a ministry too, but in a spiritual way, it's also a ministry. I think we're just a vessel. The music comes from, you know what I mean? And we're just the ones that it comes through. And our job is to communicate that to the listeners, and hope that they experience the joy that we experience. So that's how I see it. I think music creates that outreach for us. Because I traveled all over the world. I played for people in Germany, people in South America, playing music, and you really see how people like just get inside of your aura or whatever it is, your space that you're in when you play, and having seen that through my parents, I think it just translated down to me and my sister, by the way, who was also a musician too. I just think it's because of what we do, We have to deal with all kinds of people. Music is music. Music has no color necessarily. You know what I mean? It's just sound and notes. And there's feeling in there. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, people have composed music that, I just think about Marvin Gaye or Bob Dylan or somebody they wrote music that addressed the times and things like that. But the music itself has no color, But there is a message that's there sometimes,
Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Marvin Gaye the first one to change the way that the national anthem was sung?
He may have, yes.
I think that was at an NBA All-Star game or a Laker.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but I think I remember reading that. And I remember as a kid though saying,
and
that was good.
Yeah.
You slowed that down. You made it real simple.
Hendrix also did a
That's
version
right.
of
Woodstock.
the national anthem too. Yes.
Yeah. Woodstock.
That was different.
Hendrix had just a tad bit of talent.
I love
Sort of
careful.
made his way
Be
around the
careful.
song. Yeah.
right.
Let me do this, because this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys is, it wasn't too long ago I had posted when you had an interview with Russell, and then you guys sang a song right there at the
Yes.
end. And so I just posted to my personal Facebook, which I get on about once a year. Facebook to do. And I immediately had several folks, whatever the personal message thing that Facebook is called, they did that feedback. They said, "Who is this?" And the note I put in there is, and I mean that we pastors throughout Tallahassee feel like you belong to Tallahassee, the church in Tallahassee. So we want you to sing all the time, and you do. You sing in a variety of churches, and so you have a home church. But you probably feel like you have 12 home churches.
Well, anyway, my gift is for God and for God's kingdom, and that's all throughout Tallahassee, right? And all throughout wherever the world, where I'm from, back home, here, wherever he sends me, I will go and I will sing. So I don't feel that my gift, or the gift that he has given me is like bound in one home or one house. I feel if I can bless just one person with my gift, or if it changes. And that happened to me as a kid in this white church that I was in. It was such a profound moment for me, because I was singing and there was a man, I'm getting emotional, but he gave his life to Christ after I sang. And I was like, what's it all for? That's what it's for.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I'm all in when it comes to singing for God and his kingdom. I'm just all in. So wherever that happens to be, I want to be there, because that's where the blessing comes. And I just want to be among the numbers. So I do have a church, but I've never limited this voice to just one. It's God's voice, and however he wants to use it, I will let him use it. And in any form too, because I also do other genres and styles, and I get the same confirmation, which is just beautiful. People are just like, I feel, it's their feeling. They're just like, Avis, I just feel connected when you're singing. I feel like, you take me to this other place. I'll do some rock and roll stuff, and they're like, this is my church, and I'm like, well, if that's where you get it, then let's do it, let's do it. So I feel like however God wants to use me, and in whatever kind of way he wants to use me, as long as I'm doing stuff that's positive, and I keep the message positive, I feel that I'm on the right track. Because you can really touch people, even in those secular spaces. Somebody might need to hear what you've got to give. And anyway, and God knows it comes from a place of sincerity. I always ask him, just sing through me, and whoever needs to hear your voice today, let them hear you. But it began with that. I think I realized that my singing was for a greater purpose when that man, and the sad part about that whole story is he gave his life to Christ, and then he died like shortly after.
Wow.
And so I was like, and the family always like says, you have no idea what you did and how what you did impacted him. And really, I don't even think it's me. I'm like, God, I know you touched all of that and made that happen. And so as long as I can just stay in service to Christ, I feel like I'm doing the right thing in whatever form it is. And music does have that universal quality where you can go across seas and people are affected by what you do and your talent. And then you end up communicating in a way, even though you don't speak the same language, you end up communicating in a way with the music. And I think that is immensely powerful. Like when you can use music to kind of bridge a gap that could be there. So. Whew, sorry, I didn't mean to go there, but
that is good.
But it's a true story.
So I want to follow on that. I think I know the answer to this, but when you come to Wildwood, Wildwood is predominantly white, and I don't know the exact numbers that we have, but I mean, you would call this is a predominantly white church. Do you ever feel uncomfortable here?
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
I like I said, I've grown up in predominantly white churches, and I've always felt that I am just being Avis. Like I don't feel any different from who I am here to who I am somewhere else. I just try to be authentic to myself. And I do recognize that it's a white church, but I don't think it changes who I am when I'm singing. I'm just going to do me and hope that God blesses the authentic self that I am. So I think it's beautiful too, because I think people resonate with authenticity. I think when they see people just being who they are and not trying to be fake or a cater or anything, it's just like, she's just her. I see her on Sunday, I see her on Wednesday, she's always who she is. And so I think people love that authenticity. So I just try to be myself. And I've always felt welcomed here. And that's the other thing. It'd be different if people gave me the side eye or, people treated me differently, but I feel loved in this space. And that's just, God is here too, so I feel comfortable at Wildwood as well. So, and I think I attribute that to just the house that God has blessed here. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
it's certainly true. I can assure you of this. When you walk in the door, every person, including me, would much rather have you on stage than me.
Stop it.
In fact, if she could keep going, can we cut his time down? That'd be great. You ever feel uncomfortable here?
No, I never have. I was a little nervous at first when I first started playing when Stephen Phillips asked me to come in. I think it was just for a few special services or something like that. And then he ended up asking me, well, would you like be the drummer? So I was apprehensive in a little bit because I didn't want to like take anybody's, you know what I mean? Like, here's the guy that teaches at FSU and he's the jazz drummer that's traveled with, the Marcelluses or whoever. And I didn't want to be that person. But no, I haven't experienced any negative things since I've been here. I've always felt embraced by the entire church community. There's a few times when you walk by a few people and, they just kind of like you're not there, and I've even said like, good morning, and they just kind of go on. But sometimes I don't chalk it up as whatever, the majority of people always come up. They're very cordial to my family, when they come. I don't ever feel out of place here. Again, like Avis, I'm a child of God, and we're in God's house, and that's how I see it. Whether it's, a predominantly white congregation or a predominantly black congregation. I came up in the church too, so I'm saved. I'm rooted in His Word. So, to me, it doesn't matter. A Christian is a Christian. It doesn't matter to me what color you are. And I know some people have their opinions about certain things, but, I think I'm like Avis. I'm just who I am. And I just try to be as honest and forthright with people as I possibly can. I'm not saying I'm perfect or anything like that, but, I'm just human. And, just try to be a good husband to my wife and a good father to my children. And, and that's just what I think we both are just trying to do, because we saw our parents do it with us. That was my example, even as deep as like my grandparents, and seeing the situation that they came from, because I even had a great grandmother. She lived to be 101, and talk about experiences. Wow. She saw it all, and and she lived well into her 90s where she was in her right mind. And the stories, oh my goodness.
From Louisiana?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just the stories. So I get a lot of wisdom from my parents, by way of my grandparents, and even some of my great-grandparents, because I got to know them even as a little kid. So this is like coming home to me. So,
Good.
I don't feel any different if I come here versus if I go to Bethel or somewhere like that. It's all the same. I think everybody embraces. When I've had tragedies happen in my life, Pastor Holmes at Bethel has called me, but you have gotten in touch with me. Pastor Bob has gotten in touch with me, and even people from these ministries. Even recently when I had a surgery recently. We've been getting cards from people saying we're praying for you. I mean, it's the same,
Yeah.
you know? So,
It's God's people.
yeah.
Hey, I can't thank you enough for coming and spending some time with us. And again, thanks for
having
serving, like I said, the church in Tallahassee.
Yes.
And outside as well, for giving people who may not know Jesus just a slice for a little bit. Maybe it's just for one night. Maybe it's just a performance, but thanks. So thanks for being you, ultimately.
That's all I know who to be.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Blessings.
Yes.
Same to you.
Yes.